Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Core. Yeah, that's what I said. Core. You know, that's a huge fitness buzzword. Core. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to get to what is the core. Now, I'm sure that if you're involved in fitness, and I guess you would be involved somehow, but if you're listening to this podcast, that you've heard of the word core used in fitness. And what we're talking about today on the Personalized Fitness radio show is breaking down the actual muscles involved in the core, what they do, and why is it so important? Why are we talking about core so often? Well, one of the reasons, of course, I think that sells a lot because people know that's the new buzzword. Back in the 80s, it was aerobics. Then we had, of course, functional training as another big one. But core is one it's lasted for a while now. It's been going on since the beginning of this millennium, and it's hung on pretty well, and justifiably so. It's rather important. Probably the best way to look at your core is to call it your foundation. That's why it's so important. Now, let's talk about foundations. What if you started with a bad foundation? I'll give you a great example of that. One of the most famous bad foundation stories in the world, and that's the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Well, you may not know this, and I did some investigating. That's one place I haven't been. I really would like to see it one day, and I'm sure I will. But the reason it leans, and you may know this already, but it was built on soft ground, and I'm sure that's not much of a stretch to try to figure that out. But I did not know it was built as the church's bell tower, and there was actually some other towers around that area that actually leaned too. This happens to be the most significant because it's got a significant lean to it, kind of a neat story. But it was started out as a bell tower at this church, and believe it or not, in that church, Galileo was baptized in that church, so it's been around a while. But it started to lean when they got to the construction of the third story, and it leans to the south. And it leans to the south because of soft ground on that side. And as they got to the third story, they put enough weight on the structure itself that actually the weakness in the foundation started to appear. Now, I did not know this, and I just throw this out there for anybody who may be interested in the history of it. I thought it was fascinating. They actually started to elongate the sides, the stories on the south side, to try to make it look like it was more upright. And by adding the extra material on the south side, they caused it to lean even more. And why does it lean? Well, soft foundation. Foundation was giving, of course, that's what did not allow the structure, no matter what they did on top, what they added to it. If the foundation's bad, if the core is bad, then you're going to cause this problem. And problems in the core and problems in the foundation can be costly. In this instance, to the tune of 30 million euros spent in the most recent, there's been others, but the most recent attempt to stop the tower from falling. Now, it's a fantastic tourist attraction, so they're not interested in correcting the lean, but they would like to get it to stop falling because they really thought in the 80s it was going to topple over and that'd be the end of it. So between 1990 and 2001, they put 30 million euros in to correct this foundation. So a bad foundation is not where you want to start. You want to start with a strong foundation, and your core is your foundation. And think of it in the same situation. Okay, we go from a building to go into a body. If you have a weak core, how's that going to affect your golf swing? If you're a runner or a multisport athlete, how's it going to affect you? How does the core have anything to do with you getting around day to day? Again, you can understand that it's important to have a strong foundation, but if I'm not an athlete, why is that core so important? Well, I'm going to show you several reasons why you should be paying attention to your core and exactly how we go about attacking it. Kind of breaking all the myths of core here on the Personalized Fitness Podcast. Core muscles, one of the most important things they do is they actually make up the muscles for your posture control. Now, I want to get to this right off the bat, and the reason being is because we can talk about golf swinging, we can talk about swinging a bat, we can talk about athletic endeavors involving the core, but I want to bring this home. Everybody needs to be concerned about their posture. If nothing else, if you just want to avoid pain, you want to be concerned about your posture. Weak muscles in your core can cause a shifting of bones, and they can cause the bottom part of your spine to somewhat flatten. Now, you need that, what they call lordotic curve. You have lordosis in your bottom of your back, and you also have one in the top of your back, right where your neck is. And there's a slight curve, and the reason for that curve is several things. One of the things is support the weight of the head. It also aligns the head over the pelvis. The reason, especially not just the top, but you really think about it in the lower lordotic curve in the bottom part of the back, like women talk about being sway back. That's what we're talking about, that lower lordotic curve, is to absorb shock. And you may or may not realize that, but that's something that you're doing when you're walking. I mean, that lower lordotic curve is built there to absorb a lot of shock. And if you have weak core muscles, that area can actually flatten. I have clients that are this way. They have a tough time doing what we call articulating their spine, either hyperextended or rounded or hyperextended. They have a difficult time doing that because they've had weak core muscles, which cause fracture in the vertebrae, and they end up with kind of a flat lordosis. Worse than that, if you continue to lose your ability to articulate the spine and you're not taking care of those core muscles and you've got bad posture, you can create those small fractures, which create what we call a Dowager's hump. Usually starts up in the neck area, and it ends up in that hunchback look that a lot of people associate, of course, with osteoporosis. So that's why I bother having a show on this. It's not just athletes need to be worried about their core. Everybody needs to be worried about their core. Well, what is the core? What exactly is it? I mean, when people think of core, a lot of times they think of ab. And we're going to do core work, and they do crunches in order to work with core work. Well, core is actually much deeper than that. And if I were to label everything that's associated with the core, I'd pretty well go through most of the upper body. But we want to get to what is the true core. We're going to talk about the pelvic floor, muscles, the transverse abdominis, the internal and external obliques, and we're all going to get to rectus abdominis. That's what we talk about, that major six-pack muscle that we associate with the abs. Is also significant. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it on this show. Most people understand the abdominals. Those are superficial. I'm trying to get deeper than that. And there's one other, though, I mentioned here at the beginning, because when we talk about core, most people talk about the muscles on the front side of their body. You've probably heard that if you want to have a strong back, you need to have strong abs. Well, there's also a whole myriad of muscles in your back. In fact, the largest muscle in the upper body is located in your back, latissimus dorsi. But even more important than that, you have some muscles that align the spine on your back called the erector spinae. And they are, erector spinae, they're basically spinal erectors. In other words, they hold up and support your spine. And many times when we're working those abdominal muscles, we don't think about the muscles on the other side of the body. And by creating strong abdominals, but not creating a strong core, especially the strong back side of your core, you're going to create an imbalance. The reason we pull muscles is because of an imbalance. You want to know more about that, then check out my podcast on hamstrings. And you'll hear me talk a lot about the imbalance, which is why we end up pulling the hamstring a lot. So if you're strengthening the abdominals, but you're not strengthening the muscles in the lower back, then you are going to cause problems. You're not going to help problems, you're going to cause problems. But addressing your true core, you won't have that problem. Now, you don't have to break out your microscope, and I'm not going to get too technical on this, but I am going to break down the muscles, tell you a little more about them. The pelvic floor, I mentioned that a minute ago, and you've probably heard this, and women know a little more about their pelvic floor than men think about their pelvic floor, because pelvic floor is involved a lot in childbirth. And so they hear their physicians talking a lot about pelvic floor. But guys, you've got it too. You use it every single day. I guarantee you do. It happens to be involved with, your excreting of waste. Every time you go to the bathroom, I promise you, your pelvic floor is involved. Pelvic floor pelvic diagram is composed of muscles associated with connective tissue which span the area obviously underneath the pelvis. It separates the pelvic cavity above what they call the perineal region, which I'm not going to get too deep into that. But in women, it's there to accommodate the birth canal. A female's pelvic cavity is wider than a male's, which allows for childbirth. But in men, basically, that's your urination control, your control of basically sphincter control and what have you. I don't want to get too deep into that. I think you know what I'm talking about. So pelvic floor is extremely important, and it is a big part of your core. Get something a lot of people you've heard of, but you may not know very much about, and that's obliques. And that's the side part. Most people know what those obliques are. They're usually the ones that are very superficial that are called the external obliques. They're on the sides of your rib cage, and they're part of, you see an athlete or somebody that's got fantastic abs. You can see those ripples down the sides of their six-pack. That's your obliques, and that's typically what you're looking at are the external obliques, but there's also internal obliques, and these are deep muscles. Now, I keep throwing out those terms. I throw out superficial quite a few times, and I just threw out deep. Let me tell you what I mean by that. It's exactly as it sounds. A superficial muscle is on top, and it's one that we pay a lot of attention to because we can quote-unquote see it or know of it. Internal muscles we don't feel as much, but those deep muscles are extremely important because they're the closest one to the supporting of like our spine, different bone structures, pelvis, spine, even shoulders and what have you. You have deep muscles and pretty much all over your body, especially around the joints. A lot of times we don't pay attention to those deep muscles. We may pay attention to our deltoid, that big muscle on our shoulder, but we may not pay attention to the rotator cuff, which are the muscles underneath that are deep in the shoulder because it's something we can't flex and see. Well, in this standpoint, the internal obliques are the deeper muscles, and they work in conjunction with the external obliques. But the internal obliques actually attach on the pelvis. It's attached to the pelvis, and also it supports the abdominal wall. It actually assists in your breathing. It helps in expanding your cavity, your chest cavity for breathing, and it also helps in rotating and turning your trunk, which is what most people think of when they think of obliques. You need some sort of a twisting motion usually to impact your obliques. Now, it's located actually closer to the skin than what we call the transverse abdominal muscle. I'll get to that in just a minute, but it's still a very deep muscle. The external oblique is one of the outermost abdominal muscles. It extends from the lower half of the ribs around and down all the way that connects the pelvis, and you're used to seeing those. You're used to seeing those run down your side. Its lowest part connects to the top corner of the pelvis and the bottom front of it. Don't get too confused with that. But together, they work in conjunction with the internal obliques. And let me see if I can describe this and paint you a picture. The left internal works in conjunction with the right external. Now, the reason what that is, if I'm going to turn left, my left external is going to help pull the midline. Basically, it's going to pull from the center of my body because that's where it's connected. And it's going to try to pull my midline, belly button over. It's going to try to pull it to the left. Well, at the exact same time, when I'm turning that way, my right external, which sits wider, doesn't sit close to the midline, is going to grab just on the outside of the ribs on the right side and help pull that over at the same time. So the two are working in conjunction to twist my body. And the vice versa, of course, for right internal and the left external. But they work in conjunction. They call them same side rotators. The external obliques, again, are on either side, and they do help rotate the trunk. They do control that twisting motion. They also help bend sideways. It's probably the best way to say that. So if you're pulling your hip up towards your body, your external obliques are actually involved in that. And if you've ever done any kind of rotation exercises, you can feel those internal and external obliques working, and they feel very different. They don't feel as superficial as, say, a crunch does with the rectus abdominis, the ab muscles that we know, the six-pack that we know. You can actually feel those working. You can touch them, through your skin. But it feels much deeper, and that's true. That's why the external and internal obliques are far more part of your core, I believe, than your rectus abdominis because they're deeper muscles. They're tighter around that bone structure. Now, one you've probably heard a lot about, and you hear a lot about this when people are talking about working planks, and that's the transverse abdominis. And I hope I'm not boring you with all these terms, but we've got the pelvic floor, internal and external obliques, and transverse abdominis. Transverse abdominis is a muscle layer of the front and side abdominal wall, and it's a deep tissue. But let me tell you how to identify your transverse abdominis. Real simply, if you ever want to know how do you fire that or whatever, guys, see a real pretty lady walk by, and you got a little bit of a gut hanging out, and you want to make that gut disappear, you just fired your transverse abdominis. That's what that muscle does. Now, it's believe it or not, and you've heard me say this before, vanity is my favorite sin, but the transverse abdominis has a much, much more important job to do than just sucking your gut in. No, and the reason it can pull your gut in, it's a deep muscle, and it's getting close to the spine. And so when you actually tighten, when you do things like that, actually tighten that muscle up and pull in, think about it. You're wrapping a lot of strength around your spine. And do it right now. I mean, you can sit there and just suck your gut in, pull that gut in or whatever. You can feel, though it's hard to hold it like that, you can feel that strength going around your spine. And it actually helps protect it, which is why, again, the core is so important. Now, before we go too deep into this, one of the common questions we get is, of course, how do I get a six-pack? What kind of ab exercise? What's the best ab exercise to do? And the main reason why people are asking me that is not so much because they're worried about their core, but they want that flat stomach, they want that six-pack abs. And even working the transverse abdominis, even doing exercises that really focus on that muscle, that alone is not going to produce a flat stomach. Usually, the reason we're trying to produce a flat stomach, the reason we're having a difficult time seeing those abdominals, because they're there, I promise you, even if they're weak, they're there, is because, of course, we have a layer of fat on them. And you can have a body fat, you don't have to be in 6% to see the muscles. If you have a lower body fat, somewhere around the teens or whatever, and you strengthen your abdominals, of course, you are going to have those show. But none of this is going to show you quite that vanity that we're looking for here, but can make you feel better, can make you walk better. And if you happen to play any kind of sports whatsoever, I can definitely affect those by working on your core. Now, we're going back to foundation. We were talking about foundation earlier, and this is kind of, you can see the importance of the core when I use this analogy. To give you the best idea of why it's so important in daily activities, or especially in athletics, think about doing anything, lifting a weight, swinging a golf club, swinging a bat, tennis racket, not even swinging something, but just maneuvering an unwieldy object, carrying a box, a suitcase, doesn't matter. And doing that while standing in a small dinghy, a small boat on the water, trying to do it in a canoe. Well, that's going to be very tough. Some people have difficulty. In fact, they advise you not to stand up in a canoe, and you shouldn't. And why? Because it's extremely unstable. It's because unstable foundation. Well, your body is like that, believe it or not. Day to day, it is like that. What keeps you from feeling like you're in a canoe is your core. And you already have a natural tendency. You do this automatically. That's why you don't feel it. You do this automatically of tightening and firing your core in order to hold you upright, hold you steady. If not, if we went to lift something, we would literally pull ourselves over onto the ground if we were not able to engage our core, actually use the core. It's a very important part of our functional training, and functional training is how we live. When we go to get up out of a chair, that's a functional movement. We're not just firing quadriceps, we're firing quadriceps, glutes, and what have you, and we're having to hold our body balanced and steady. Even though it doesn't feel like it, I'm balanced, I can stand up out of a chair. There's a lot of balance that's going on there, and there's a lot of firing of your core. Where we run into problems is if we have a weak core. Because if it's weak, then what's going to happen is your body's going to have to compensate somewhere. And that's going to throw you off balance. Now, throwing you off balance can be throwing you literally off balance where you're staggering and falling down. But it can also be a situation of causing an imbalance which causes a weakness. Causing weakness, yes. But more importantly, it's usually presented because of a weakness, and therefore it will cause damage in an area. If you're unbalanced and you're not firing the right muscles, then everything that's attached to that muscle, everything that works in conjunction with that muscle is going to be affected. So let's go back to the golf swing. Let's say you're swinging a golf club and you do have weak internal obliques. Do you say you have your left internal oblique as a weak? Well, remember how I was talking about how the internal and external obliques work in conjunction? Well, then that's going to force your external oblique on the other side to be overloaded, which can cause a pull. And it doesn't stop there. Again, they support your back, so it can go into your back, and it can cause a problem there. And this is why a lot of times when somebody's looking for a problem in their core, and they'll go right to where that point of pain is, where many times as an exercise physiologist, I'll look at the entire movement and say, actually, it starts over here, where they're not having pain. You may not be having pain in the internal oblique on the left side, but it's presenting pain in the right side, of what we call referred pain. So when you're looking at working on the core, stabilizing the core, and I'm going to stop there. There's several other muscles, the quadratus lumborum, there's a lot of other muscles to be affected with it, but we're going to focus on those. But when you're looking at working on or paying attention to or making a difference in the core, one of the most important things you need to do is to correctly identify where your weaknesses are. Now, we have a way of doing that. We actually can take you through a variety of exercises to help identify where you do have a weakness. I bring up golf a lot because I have a lot of golfers that come in. They know that strength training is good for them. They may know in depth about the subject as far as strength training is concerned. They may have just heard because, Phil Mickelson does that they should be working out. But we do some simple evaluations to find out where they have a weakness, and then we focus on that weakness. And one of the best ways to do that is to use functional training. In fact, sometimes the least amount of equipment is the best way to work that core, because it forces you, like suspension training, using suspension straps where you're hanging, you're firing the core, you're having to hold yourself just to conduct the exercise. Your core has got to be firing perfectly. And a lot of times when we're doing certain exercises on a TRX or a suspension trainer, we can find weaknesses really quick just by having somebody get in position and try to conduct the exercise, even if they're not overloading by moving their feet forward or backward and causing a lot of resistance. We can identify it because it puts them in a plane where they actually have to work, use their core in order to hold themselves steady. Typically, when we go to work the core, we go after those superficial muscles. We're doing abdominal exercises. We're doing crunches, reverse crunches. Maybe we do some twisting. We think we're sufficiently hitting the core. If you really want to hit the core, you really want to address that, then look at your different functional lifts. Everything from a squat to a deadlift to a power clean. That's a great way to work on your core. And it doesn't have to be done with heavy weights, but we want to do it where we're forcing the body to handle stress in several different directions. Think about swinging a bat. You start with the weight behind you, you end up with the weight back behind you, basically on the other side. And think about, as that bat's swinging, how many stresses and what directions you're putting that stress in. You're putting it pretty much all the way around the body. Well, as you're doing that, you're firing different parts of the core. So we want to find exercises that do such things. Rotational cables, suspension trainers, fully engaged Olympic lifting. And then on top of that, if you're going to address this situation, especially if you have a pain in your back, some kind of a problem or a weakness, or if you are an athlete and you are seeing problems in your golf swing, problems in your baseball swing, problems in tennis, or ending up with referred pain in your back or somewhere in your hips for that matter, most likely you've got a weakness in your core. If you're looking to address all those, well, then we need to look at doing some functional training after we take time to identify exactly what part of your core is weak. And the neat thing about that is that you can fix it at any age. Now, you've heard me talk about this before. Age doesn't dictate our ability. And activity dictates our ability. Nutrition dictates our ability. Lifestyle dictates our ability. Mindset dictates our ability. Time passing on a calendar does not dictate our ability. So you can change these things at any time. It's just first we need to identify where the problem is and identify what's causing it. Because typically an imbalance in your core is being caused by inactivity, most likely from one of those four things. Typically fitness and lifestyle, but it can be an indirect result from mindset. It can be an indirect result from nutrition. But simple things like always opening the door with the same hand, always putting on your seatbelt with the same arm, always crossing one leg and not crossing the other leg. Doing these things repetitively can cause one side to be stronger than the other and therefore cause an imbalance. And typically that imbalance starts off in the foundation. It starts off in the core, or it ends up in the core, one or the other. Now, one of the most dangerous things you can do is just start to randomly address things in your core without having them correctly identified. If you especially have a problem, do this because a friend of mine had a pain in his back, therefore he started doing this exercise, so I'm going to start doing this exercise. That can be dangerous. Okay, you could be luck of the draw and you're able to pinpoint it. But the best way is to have a professional identify exactly where the problem is. And this is something we do on a regular basis here at Personal Edge. When we find somebody's got a phantom pain, we're going to spend time on looking at not only the way they move, but also a lot of time talking to them about what they were doing, when this occurs, how long until it occurs. And we trace back in their lifestyle what's going on, in their fitness what's going on, and we can identify what's causing it. Because fixing is one thing, but if we're fixing it and we keep causing it, well, we're just kind of running in circles. And guessing what the problem is can be dangerous because you can start overworking an area that you think is weak. We see this a lot in runners that don't feel like they're fast enough, and their first answer is to lengthen their stride. Now, that can be the answer for a lot of people. But if you're already turning your foot out, if you notice when you're running, you're turning one foot out, or when you're walking, you're turning one foot out, what's happening is your leg is trying to gain length. It's actually trying to add length to that side because you've got an imbalance. Most people call that a leg length difference. It's really not. It's typically a weakness in the core and a weakness in the hips that causes that. It can also cause back problems. But if you were to identify it, like a lot of people think with running, I need to lengthen my stride to make me faster, and they misidentified what their problem is, you're going to exacerbate the problem. You're going to make it worse. So one of the most dangerous things is to misdiagnose a weakness in your core. So the first thing you want to do is diagnose it correctly, and then you want to address it with the right exercises. And I promise you, you can turn it around. You can make a huge difference. And a strong core can make a difference not only as an athlete. In fact, a strong core can make a difference in every aspect of your life, especially just your day-to-day, because we are using our core all the time, 24/7. It rarely gets a rest. If you're interested in some help with that, please don't think twice about contacting me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. Or you're welcome to call us here at our Mobile location at 251-341-0927. We'd love to speak to you more about you and your core. Anything we can do to help you live your level of wellness.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251 888-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.